Hello friends, and welcome to the first lesson in the Information Literacy module. My name is Erin Painter, and I am the manager of the Connecticut UNO Creativity Library. You might be wondering, what is a creativity library? Well, this particular library is part of UNO Libraries, and the collection is focused on the exploration of creative ideas across a lot of subjects. Creativity isn't just for the arts. We have materials that explore creative ways of looking at history, philosophy, linguistics, and even cooking. The Connecticut UNO Library offers a space for patrons to access resources and materials that they might not find in their day-to-day lives. Our attention is focused on stimulating and celebrating creativity. We seek to inspire people to expand their awareness of their own creativity and of their communities within an atmosphere of flexible learning. Under the umbrella of UNO, we are also committed to excellence, engagement, inclusion, discovery, integrity, and of course, the Maverick spirit. So what is the purpose of this lesson? This lesson is going to be about some types of bias that we encounter in our daily lives through media and our communities. And specifically, we'll examine the unconscious biases that we may have as a result of exposure to biased images and language we encounter every day. When you're done with this video, you will be able to reflect on your own comfort level when talking about race and talking about your own unconscious racial biases. You'll be able to describe how stereotypes inform our implicit unconscious biases and how implicit bias impacts our interactions with our daily lives and with the people around us. You're going to be able to learn strategies for having open and honest conversations about race. So first, let's start with some vocabulary that you may or may not be familiar with. But I want us all to be on the same page with what these words mean in the context of this lesson. Stereotype. A stereotype is an assumption about a person or even a thing based on how they look or how they make you feel. Many times, stereotypes are formed by biased images that make a group seem good or bad or beautiful or ugly, etc. Stereotypes are not always bad. Stereotypically, puppies and kittens are cute. But not everybody feels that way. Some people would stereotype birds as more beautiful. There's a stereotype that Southern folks have a thick accent and like fried food. This isn't necessarily a good or a bad stereotype, but we also need to remember that it isn't always accurate, right? Stereotypes are not always accurate. For example, I'm from the South, but I don't have a thick accent. I used to, but I don't anymore. But I do enjoy fried food. I can tell you that much. The image on this graphic illustrated what could be negative and even damaging stereotype. Looking at this image, we might assume, if we had to guess without knowing any differently, that the man on the left, Snoop Dogg, would be the one who would have spent significant time in jail, and the woman on the right would not have. She looks very motherly, right? However, while Snoop Dogg has been arrested multiple times, he has not spent any length of time in prison. On the other hand, Martha Stewart spent several years in jail for tax issues. So we can see how stereotypes, even if they're neither negative or positive, can often be inaccurate. Our next vocabulary word is stigma. A stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. A stigma is always negative and is usually born out of a previous stereotype. So like I said before, stereotypes are essentially neutral. On the other hand, a stigma at its core is a negative idea about someone or something based on how they look or the particular circumstances or experiences they have. Going back to the Southern stereotype of having a thick accent, some might take that stereotype to this next level of stigma and stigmatize that accent because they feel the Southern accent implies an ignorance or less than intelligent person than someone who has a neutral accent. There is a stigma associated with people who have been to prison. They frequently have trouble finding employment because of this. There's a stigma associated with folks who have struggled with mental health, and we can see that illustrated in this graphic. And for some, just the color of someone's skin or religious affiliations can be a stigma for them, like a hijab or a turban. Our next word is discrimination. So a stigma is a bad association around an appearance or social political circumstance, but doesn't necessarily imply acting on that stigma. And neither does really having a stereotype. Stigmas and stereotypes are kind of passive, and we don't always necessarily act on them. You can have a passive stigma or stereotype that you don't act on. However, when you give either unjust or preferential treatment of different categories of people or things, you call that discrimination. We can see discrimination in something as simple as, I discriminate against big cars. I don't like driving them. But there isn't anything inherently wrong with a big car versus a small car. So then it's not fair necessarily for me to discriminate against the big car. But we can also see discrimination in more harmful places like the workplace, as we can see in our illustration here. In this graphic, the employer is hiring someone not based on experience or on who might be the best for the job, but because the person is young. This is called age discrimination. And we can also see racial and gender discrimination in the workplace and other places as well. Now we're going to talk a little bit about bias. So now that we have some vocabulary as our base, we got to ask the question, what is bias? Bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. There are many types of bias, both conscious and unconscious. What do I mean by conscious and unconscious bias? A conscious bias is one you know you have. For example, I know I'm biased toward chocolate chip cookies instead of plain sugar cookies, which is a conscious bias. An unconscious bias, which is what we're going to focus on a little more in a bit, is one you have and you don't even realize you have it. It's not something you may think about in specific terms. It just may be kind of a feeling that you have that you're not completely aware of. So let's talk about one kind of bias that feeds our unconscious bias. And then we'll talk more in depth about unconscious bias and the harm it can do. So confirmation bias is when you seek out information that confirms what you already believe, as we can see illustrated on our little comic here. In other words, when someone would like to believe something is true, they often end up believing it is true through wishful thinking, and which leads us to stop gathering evidence when that belief is confirmed and ignore evidence that contradicts or goes against what somebody wants to be true. This can be a very dangerous practice, and it isn't what good researchers and informed citizens should do when gathering information about a topic. But it's so easy. It feels good to have our beliefs confirmed, and sometimes it feels bad when our beliefs are challenged by new information, even if that information is valid and should be examined critically. To bring it back to politics, we see this all the time in social media and in choosing our news sources. If someone is a conservative, they may seek out information or news in places like Fox News or Newsmax or Breitbart and dismiss information from more liberal publications. On the other hand, someone with liberal beliefs may seek out information from the New York Times or the Washington Post and reject information that challenges the viewpoints in these publications. Confirmation bias feels good, but we always have to make sure and dig into why we have the beliefs we have and make sure they're informed by both sides of an argument or issue. So what is unconscious bias? Unconscious biases are stereotypes, remember that word from our vocabulary, about groups of people that we form outside of conscious awareness. We all have unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, which stems from our need to organize our world. If we look at our graphic here, when we first encounter a person or a situation, we have an initial unconscious and reflexive reaction. This can be considered a survival tactic, as we can quickly assess a situation and react. However, as critically thinking human beings, we can also analyze those reactions and decide why we're having them and if that reaction is valid. It's important to understand that an unconscious bias is natural and normal, but we have to be critical thinkers even about our own biases so that we can be better informed and inclusive citizens. So where does unconscious bias start? A lot of unconscious bias is racial. We see someone who looks different than ourselves, we might unconsciously categorize them unfairly. Where do we get these ideas about the other folks, about other races or other social areas? We get them from our social circles, our environment, or the culture we were raised in or live in, and also from the media. The media uses images and language to trigger unconscious biases and make us feel a certain way about an incident or groups of people. As you can see from the images on this slide, these are both from the same publication reporting on two very similar crimes. In the top one, you can see the images they used for the alleged burglars are their senior high school photos. In the bottom one, they used mugshots. Even though the crimes were similar, and even though all of these men are innocent until proven guilty, the images at top trigger an unconscious bias that maybe these young men are good kids who made a bad decision. By using the mugshots for the second images, it triggers an unconscious bias that these young men are already guilty, as these are pictures of their arrest. No one looks good in a mugshot, and everyone looks good in their senior pictures. These images serve to inform a bias that black folks are criminals and white folks are just kids who made a mistake. Language and unconscious bias images aren't the only thing that can trigger our unconscious bias. Language combined with images can be a powerful trigger for bias. As you can see in the image and the text here, the word senseless, as it is used here, tells us, before we even read the article, that the author does not think much of the immigration plan. This strong, charged language, combined with an image that blacks out the Statue of Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, which has been a symbol of hope for immigrants coming from overseas and a representation of America's commitment to the melting pot of cultures. If your unconscious bias tells you that too much immigration is bad, this headline and image might make you angry because it challenges that bias. If you feel that immigration should be encouraged, this headline and image combination might make you happy that someone is calling out the policy as senseless. In my own experience with unconscious bias, I was raised in an environment where, unfortunately, racist and sexist jokes were prevalent and thought to be funny. As I entered adulthood, I started realizing that the stereotypes portrayed in these jokes led me to have unconscious biases about folks from certain races, religions, and social groups. It took some self-examination about these biases and some critical thinking about the environment I grew up in to move past these biases and accept each person for who they are, regardless of any other external traits. And that's the key, to think critically about our initial reactions, to examine whether they are based in facts and truth or whether our reaction is influenced by things we encounter in our daily environments. So now that we've gone through this lesson, we have a couple of activities for you. You will be able to choose from one. You can do one of them or do them both as kind of a supplement, right? So this first activity is a kind of reflection and writing activity and discussion prompt. So you want to reflect on some of the unconscious biases you may have after you've watched this. It's a 2 to 3 minute video. It's not too long. Why do you think that you have some of these unconscious biases? Take some time to write a short paragraph and then discuss with your teacher or other students who watched this lesson online, or if you're in class, talk with them in there. And then go to this website here and take a bias test. Did your results confirm your suspicions about a bias you think you have or not? Were you surprised by the results? So reflect on how you can start to recognize your own unconscious bias. What are some strategies that you can use to not allow unconscious biases? Write a short paragraph, discuss with your friends, right? Other activity that I would encourage you to do, and it can be done, like I said, instead of or in addition to the first activity. I want you to create your own biased image and or text. Think about a bias that you want to trigger in someone else, and choose images, colors, and language to trigger that bias. You can use whatever medium you are most comfortable with. If you want to draw in pencil or charcoal, do it. If you want to use paint and stencils, do it. If you're good at graphic arts on the computer, like Photoshop, use that medium. Or if you want to write a headline using charged language and a short opinion article, that'll work too. The point is to use what we've learned about unconscious bias in images and language and apply it to our own work. Share your image or text with your friends in class and discuss the bias you're trying to trigger. See if it was effective and why or why not. That's all for this lesson. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, that you further your learning through these activities. Join us for our next module on information literacy, where we'll explore how to critically examine the information we come across to get to primary sources. Until then, take care, and we will see you soon.